Welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Whether you're a pastor, youth leader, ministry volunteer, parent, or student, we want to be your go-to and most trusted resource for equipping and encouragement when it comes to your ministry and leadership influence. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. My name's Eric, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. We have with us Jeff Bogue. Jeff, you are the senior pastor of Grace Church of Greater Akron, and we're talking about church hurt today.
Yes.
So, are you ready? You're sitting down?
I am.
Yeah. I have something to bring you, Jeff. No.
Okay.
Oh, man. You ever get those, Jeff? Like people want to have a meeting and come into the office and tell you all about their church hurt. And then you realize this didn't happen here.
Yeah.
This was
and sometimes it did, to be honest with you. So.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Jeff, there's a I don't know if it's a cultural phenomenon, if it's the rise of social media and technology, but it seems like more and more people are carrying wounds and baggage from the church, from people, and they're trying to process and wrestle through this. So we wanted to just open up a conversation today on maybe what for some is a tough topic, on what for us as pastors we don't often like to talk about or admit or own. So let's kind of dive in headlong into this here and see if we can make sense of this topic. One of the things we like to do on the podcast is just define our terms. So, Jeff, when you hear somebody use that phrase, church hurt, I'd say it's important to have a foundation of that. What is it? What do you see that? Put some boundaries around it. Acknowledge it. Address it.
I think that's actually part of the problem with when you talk about church hurt is there's a continuum, and so to me the continuum is not hard to define, but how you perceive yourself on it is the source of it. So to me, church hurt is a continuum of people who leadership and people who have sinned against me and abused their power and their influence and the word of God to hurt me or control me or use me is like one side of the continuum. The other side of the continuum that I see is church hurt is tied to my expectations as to what the church should be and how they should have interacted with me. And on that continuum, when I hear people say church hurt or they talk to me about church hurt, they're usually talking to me somewhere along that continuum, that one of those two things is where they need to be with it.
All right, so take us into like how common is this? Go a little deeper into that continuum, or like what are some of the forms that play out, and that how does that naturally how do people respond to that?
Well, I think on the one side is the people who have abused their role in the church and they've hurt me or they've used me, and I actually think that is way more common than we want it to be, and I think it is a lot of what the Apostle Paul and Peter were addressing in the New Testament. They addressed false teachers. They rebuked individuals. Jesus in the seven churches of Revelation is extremely clear that there's many people and churches that will claim his name but do not follow his heart. The Bible warns of antichrist. So not the Antichrist that makes all the movies, but many, many false Christ that are out there. And I think you see that all the time. I think you see everything from the mega prosperity gospel guys that fly the jets and have the mansions, all the way down to, I actually think, as a rule, small churches are more dysfunctional than large ones, because you tend to have the leader tends to have more sway over the individuals. So if you don't support me, you're wrong, I'm right. Throwing their weight around, playing favorites, sweeping sin under the carpet, from abuse to greed to abusive leadership, not dealing with things that should be dealt with, mishandling of money, sexual impropriety, manipulating God's word to control you. That every time there's a verse that applies to you, I make sure that we lean into it. And every time there's a verse that applies to me, I make sure that I discount it. Abusing the pulpit, using the pulpit to control or to correct people. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. And people, innocent people, get caught in the mix. People of God who are trying to serve God, who are trying to follow God, are used by people who call themselves the church. And then that comes out as church hurt. I was used up, spit out, thrown away, etc. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is often church leaders who are trying to do the right thing and trying to interact the scripture in the right way, and it either doesn't meet people's expectations or they position themselves as a victim. So there was a divorce, the church implemented discipline, the offending party in the church was removed from the church, and now they would say, I have church hurt, because they took her side. There was small groups where people were trying to love each other. You had trouble connecting, and now it's church hurt because the church isn't what it was supposed to be. There is human failings. I went to church for all these years. I got sick. The church didn't interact with me the way I wanted them to. Church hurt, know. And it's not that all of that is illegitimate. It's that it's based on your expectations of what the church should be, as opposed to a specific wrong that the church did. Every time that I lead a vision campaign, I have people leave the church. And that would sometimes come up as like church hurt. I'm like, we just didn't agree about something. I've had people get sick or injured, and 50 people from the church reached out to them and surrounded them. But because I didn't do what they wanted me to do personally, church hurt. I'm like, that's wildly unfair, and so there's those examples as well. And I think where you're at on that continuum is just wildly important as you're processing what to do in the midst of this hurt.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jeff. So for our listeners, if somebody in our audience is listening to this and they've maybe used that phrase, like, I've been hurt by the church, maybe they're wrestling with that and trying to pinpoint what is it that caused that. How do you help counsel them? What advice would you give them to figure out the root cause or the heart of the issue for them? And then what do they do with it? Where do they take that?
Yeah, I think you have to start with where are you at on the continuum? because it directly affects the answer.
Yep.
So I give you an example. I had a couple come to our church for the first time and never met them before, came for the first time, and somebody brought them up to me and said, "Hey, you should meet these people." So it was great. You know, I was meeting them, I was talking to them. This is all in the lobby, and I would say in probably 4 minutes, it came out. We're upset with our old church, so we came here. And so I said, "Well, what are you upset about?" Well, they didn't handle a situation correctly. They blew it. They swept it under the rug, and we're really upset by their lack of integrity. I said, okay. So I said, have you talked to the pastors and the elders about that? Well, they're the ones that swept it under the rug. And I said, okay. I said, well, so what does that mean they swept it under the rug? Well, this was the story. Somebody had offended them. They went to the pastors about the offense. The pastors pulled the offender in. They confronted the offender. The offender apologized to the one he offended, and then apologized to the pastors for being offensive. And the pastors deemed the matter closed. And the one who was standing in my lobby, who was the offended person, was like, "That's not enough." And so I try to be very loving, but I looked at him and I was like, "Actually, that is enough. Like, I love you, but your pastors didn't sweep anything under the rug. They went and they dealt with it and they faced the person. Well, he's a big giver and he's real influential." And so I'm like, well, now you're the one who is accusing him of something. Like, that's not the problem. And if the pastors dealt with it, because this wasn't like sexual impropriety or somebody stole money. It literally was like he said something the guy didn't like. And so by the end of that conversation, as that was surfaced, I was looking at him saying, "Brother, actually what happens is, like, you need to go back and, like, forgive your brother 70 times 7. He asked for your forgiveness. He apologized. He received the correction of the elders. You're being bitter." And to his credit, the man agreed with me and went back to his old church. But I'm like, understanding that, like, as a leader, I'm like, this isn't church hurt. This is personal hurt. And actually you need to finish the work. Okay. Now I could tell you another scenario of, there was sexual impropriety on behalf of a leader that the elders did not deal with because the leader was talented and they didn't want to lose his talent. And so the family came through a course of conversations. I heard that story. They were very hurt, very disappointed, very disillusioned. And I was like, you know what, guys, you should be. And so my response to them was, I want you to come to Grace Church. I want you to sit for a year. I want you to heal. And just let us love you and help you with it. Because they had been hurt by the church. The leaders of the church failed to follow the scripture. And I'm like, and I happen to have known the story, so I knew it was credible. And I'm like, yeah, like that is actually a right reason to leave a church. You cannot be in agreement with that. I have another story of a church that took a theological turn it should not have taken. And a bunch of families wound up at Grace. Well, I set them all down. I'm like, wait a minute. Groups of people from other churches make me nervous. So I set them down and they're like, Pastor Jeff, we agree with you theologically, we cannot agree with our old church theologically. I'm like, okay. After they explained it, I'm like, that's a valid reason to make a move. Welcome to grace. Says that. So you have to investigate it and you have to walk it through. And I would say to leaders, it comes out funny. Like I had this one lady was new to the church and she was like grilling me on like financial processes. I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Like it was just kind of ridiculous. Well, her last church, they stole money. And what I discovered was she wasn't grilling me. She was like, I just want to know you guys care about this because it hurts people.
Yep.
And I'm like, you're absolutely right. So once I got to know her heart a little bit, I'm like, actually, here's this safety, this safety, this safety. One of the things I implemented in my life as the senior pastor of the church, I can't access the church's money. I don't carry a church credit card. I literally cannot access the church's money. Well, she wasn't doubting that I might steal from the church. She was appreciative that we cared so much about financial integrity that I would have implemented something like that. So you have to dig at it a little bit. But Eric, I've had young people that have left our church. They say church hurt, and I'm like, no, we loved you, we walked with you. Some of them like practically grew up in my home. I'm like, you've been loved, served. I've had conversations with you. You would walk into my house without knocking. That's how at home you felt. You have taken on a different sexual identity, or you've changed your politic. Mm-hmm. And then you're saying church hurt because I can't agree with you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not fair. We can say church disagreement. That would be an accurate thing, but no one hurt you, and certainly not on purpose.
Jeff, as I'm listening to these stories, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing this, but I think the question that comes to my mind is like, for each of us as individuals, we go into scenarios, especially community churches, a new environment with a certain set of expectations.
Yeah.
And when those expectations aren't then met, I think we have to do the hard work to look inward and say, did I do an adequate job of communicating the expectations that I'm placing on my pastor, in your marriage, in your community, like, or did I internalize that and I placed the bar here and they could never meet that because I didn't ask them or tell them.
Yeah.
So,
I think if you approach all that honestly, it's huge. You know, I had a lady a few months ago say to me, she said, Jeff, I'm really disconnected. And she said, our life group, we plant a lot of churches, so our life group broke up because some went and planted. She said, I'm not volunteering. And she said, if I don't get connected soon, I'm going to disconnect from the church. And then what she said was this, because she was not threatening me. What she said was, would you help me? Like, what I'm doing is not working. I know it's tied to me. Would you help me with that? And I'm like, that is a wonderful, honest thing. I had a lady one time come to me and she said, Jeff, I'm very angry and upset with you. Okay. I said, well, what's going on? She said, Jeff, I told you my mother was dying and I asked you to come see her and now she's passed away and you never came. And I looked at her and I said, that is 100% on me. I failed you. I failed you as a pastor. I failed you as a friend. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness. But she communicated, and she was right. That was my fault. She told me after
Yeah.
church in between services, and I forgot. It was absolutely my fault. Because she even said, I've come here for X number of years. She said, I've never asked you for anything. And I wept with her. I was like, you haven't. I've asked you to serve. I've asked you to give. I've asked you to follow. You've never asked me. And the one time that you said, Pastor Jeff, would you pay attention to me? I failed you. So I think, but what she did was she communicated, and then I have to humble down and not give my excuses and be defensive. And I'm like, but she communicated, and that alleviates so much. The I got upset and disappeared just starts a cycle of pain that's unbelievable. I've even had people, and I appreciate this. They'll come to me. I can tell you an example of a man that came to me and said, Jeff, we decided to start going to a different church. This is what he said. He goes, we miss our old friends. And honestly, we haven't done the work to make new ones here. So we're going to go. I had a friend that I really appreciate and love came to me and said, Jeff, my family and I are going to go to a different church. I think I just don't like the methods of grace. And I think that these other methods mean more to me than I thought they did. So we're going to go be a part of there. Well, now we know. Now there's no awkward Walmart moment where like, do you go here? Do you not go here? Like, I'm not sure. And that is a brother or sister, like loving another brother or sister saying, you can't do that. By the way, I think that is important, like with church discipline. Like a few times I've had to discipline people in the church, and I will sit them down and look them in the eye and say, you're not allowed to come here anymore. Well, why not? Well, because you cheated on your wife, and now this is your wife and family in church. You will not reconcile. The Bible tells me to. Well, now we know. I don't just stop talking to them.
Right.
So I think what you're saying there, Eric, is just huge. Like communication both ways. There's a lot of pain in assumption. And if I can remove assumption, even if I don't like what you said to me, at least now we know what our relationship is and how to function in it.
Absolutely. Oh man. I hope that our audience and our listeners here are hearing that. I know that this is the heart of you as a pastor, that I would agree with you. I want to know those things. I know many of the pastors who are listening to this are probably like, me too. I'd love to know. It does remove the awkwardness. It does remove the assumptions. It does remove the hurt feelings of then when you can deal with it and heal and move on, and maybe it is time. Jeff is a really big deal. It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Jeff, talk a little bit into let's go back to these individuals who maybe have experienced this church hurt. What do you see the negativity or the impact maybe of their faith, their personal relationship with God, their spiritual well-being? And then even talk about for the non-believers who might be watching this process, their coworkers, as they're trying to heal, as they're trying to make sense of it. What have you seen in terms of that impact or the toll that it might take on the individual and then the community watching?
I think you have to go back to the greatest commandment, which is love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that we have to remember that our relationships with people are directly connected to our relationships with God. And so if I have bitterness or anger or unforgiveness or unresolved conflict with the people of God, I actually have bitterness, anger, and unresolved conflict with the person of Jesus. So, I can't Eric, your wife Bethany, who is wonderful, if I hated Bethany, well, what kind of friendship could we possibly have? Or if I didn't care if I ever saw your kids,
Mm.
like I don't have to raise your kid, but like I was completely indifferent about your children. If you were like, yeah, Addie broke her arm, I'm like, oh well,
Right.
like it would hurt you, right? So we cannot separate our relationship with God from our relationship with his people.
Hmm.
And that's part of why Jesus says, like, by your love for one another is how they'll know you're my disciples, is as you love each other, you're loving me. And as you respond to me, you're responding to each other. It's all interconnected. So what I would say is a couple of things. What I would say is, if you have bitterness toward the people of God from your past, you are the offended brother, Matthew 18. You should go to them and seek to resolve that bitterness and reconcile that relationship. That probably does not mean that you work every little thing out. That may not even, some of those people may be dead. But you're going to have to look and say, how can I forgive them? How can I release? How can I move on? If you are hiding or harboring sin, like if there is sexual abuse, the fruitless deeds of darkness should be brought to the light. And it may not be going back and facing your abuser. It may be connecting with a present pastor or leader or someone that you trust now. But you do not bear the burden of like, I was abused, but I got to keep my mouth shut because I can't put a black mark on the church. Like, no. The church has to purify and deal with itself. And I would say, if you have expectations that are unmet, if you're disappointed because your pastor wouldn't let you sing a solo or preach a sermon, you have to look at your own pride. And so I think the biggest thing I'm saying is, like, don't just sit on church hurt. Release it, deal with it, process it, and look internally and externally and make sure it's dealt with. There's this wonderful lady in our church that I was talking with, and she came to church, and she was grilling. She was one of these people who was grilling me about, are there elders over you, and do you have accountability? And so I'm like, I'm trying to answer these questions, and then I was like, okay, why are you asking me these things? Like, this is a little random. Well, tons and tons of church hurt. So she started telling me her story about her husband, the pastor, who was abusive, how she told the elders they wouldn't deal with it, et cetera, it led to a divorce, tons of pain. So after we talked for a while, I talked to her again a couple weeks later. I said, can I ask you a question? She goes, yeah. I said, why do you keep coming to church? Like, you have so much junk. In her childhood at church, there was sex abuse. I'm like, you have so much crap. Like, why do you even keep working at this? And I loved her answer. She said to me, I keep working at this because I know there's other people like me here. And if I can love Jesus and love his people, then maybe it will give them hope to love Jesus and love his people. And I said to her, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Where she was determined to deal with it because she saw herself being used by God. Yeah. And she, in essence, said, these are my words, but in essence, she said, I can't have a healthy relationship with God if I hate all of his family. So I'm determined to work through the issues with his family, and my radar's up. So if I'm going to join this part of God's family, I want to know that you guys aren't idiots. What am I getting into? And that's why I'm asking all these questions. I'm like, well, that's just wisdom there. But I just was blown away by her strength and her determination to to live in the relationships that God had directed her to live into. And I thought, man, that's just amazing. I actually told her story without her. I asked her if I could tell her story, but I was like, you're an amazing example of
Yeah.
doing the painful thing because it's the right thing. So that's the hurt side of it.
Yeah.
Pastor side of it, get your defenses down, because guys, sometimes we just mess up, and sometimes the criticism, like if somebody says to me, grace is hard to get involved with, I don't want to be defensive about that. I want to understand why it's hard for them, because it's not true across the board, but it's been true for them. So maybe they're loving me enough to give me a real answer so we can go solve a real problem. And I'm like, and it's hard because I'm defensive like everybody else is. I'm like, okay, I need to hear that so that maybe we can make that problem go away for the next person. So it's loving each other back and forth. That's ultimately the solution and the path to healing.
Yeah. Jeff, that is so cool. The perspective that you're offering, the wisdom of this lady that was willing to shift her perspective and see that maybe others are in the same boat and I can help. So I think there is a huge win for God's kingdom, and there is a huge potential for you if you're that individual who's holding that bitterness or that church hurt. Maybe you need to go back and have a hard conversation, and open up and be vulnerable with a pastor and see if they might, be receptive to that. So you don't, I keep going back to this, like, you don't know if you don't try, and vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Somebody's got to go first, and it gives an opportunity for the people of God to reflect his nature and his character, and you just might be surprised at the response sometimes. So yeah, Jeff, I love this conversation. I think we're probably barely scratching the surface here. Give us your final thoughts. If somebody is kind of wrestling with that bitterness, and maybe they're going to turn off this episode and walk away and go, well, they didn't understand, or they don't know what they're talking about. Like, what do you say to the person who's just deeply wounded? What advice do you give?
Keep your eyes on the founder, not the followers. Like every follower of Jesus follows Jesus imperfectly. So Jesus is the author and the perfecter of our faith. His church is his directive. It's not man-made religion, it's his directive. And so our salvation is usually worked out in relationships with other people. Why that's hard is because what human beings do the best, the most consistently, and the most naturally is we sin against each other. And so when human beings, with all the best intentions in the world, are going to hurt each other, and then human beings that are sinful are really going to hurt you, and there's a wisdom that has to come into the church with all of that. So keep your eyes on the founder, not his followers. And I say to people almost every week, I say, Jesus loves you perfectly, completely, and fully. We love you. We're just not that good at it. But we would love to be with you. Just know we're not hypocrites. We're just screwed up. So if you want to hang out with a bunch of screwed up people, we're here every weekend, kind of thing. And I think that that's important to say. I think it's important for unbelieving, unchurched people to know that we're screwed up. We're not perfect. We're not even remotely trying to be. And I think it also sets an expectation. We're a bunch of screwed up people trying to follow a perfect God, and that's actually kind of hard to do. Right. When we give grace to each other, we help each other in it. And then I would say, for those of you who are genuinely deeply hurt by the church, I'm just so sorry. That is not the heart and the mind of Jesus. And you were wronged. It is sinful. the Bible specifically says that those who did that will be judged. God will hold them accountable for that, because in the name of Christ, that should have never happened to you. So I know that I'm not the one who hurt you, but if I could step in their place to offer you an apology and to grieve that pain was caused in your life, then I would gladly bear that burden, just for somebody from quote unquote the church to see you, hear you, and apologize to you for something that should have never happened to you in the first place. And I would just say from there, look to the founder. And when you look to the founder, what you will find is you will find his followers sincerely trying to follow him. And I didn't say every church building, but we're out there. There's actually a lot of us, and we're doing our best, and you probably fit into that category, and you'd be welcome, at least at Grace Church and at Momentum. You'll be welcome.
I love it. I love it. Jeff, this is super good. Thank you for sharing all that, and being vulnerable and sharing some of the stories. I know that you could have not shared that and just been general and nondescript, but thank you for doing that. We obviously hope and pray that this is helpful for you, for your ministry, to help navigate a tough topic and be able to step in where needed, or maybe look within and be able to figure out what is the unmet expectation that I've had that's not been communicated or been unfair to somebody. And so we challenge, we encourage you, we pray for you in that process to be bold, to be vulnerable, and go engage in those conversations that maybe God's tugging on your heart. So be obedient when the Spirit leads, and we're with you as much as we can, and we'll do whatever it takes. So thanks so much. Jeff, maybe we need to do a part 2 of this episode and talk about church covenants and membership and that other side too. That's fun.
Any way we can help.
Yep. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you found it to be valuable. And if you did, would you share it with someone else in your network who might enjoy it? Also, would you please go on and subscribe, rate, and review it? That way you don't miss any more, and somebody else will be able to find it too. Also, because we want to be your trusted resource, if you have a question or topic that you would like us to discuss on an upcoming episode, send that to us via email to info@buildmomentum.org, or you can send us a DM on any of our social media platforms. You can find us there at Momentum Ministry Partners. Also, if you need more information on our ministry, be sure to check out our website at buildmomentum.org. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.